Millionaire dad took his twins on a blind date, pretended to be broke. Everything changed when she offered to pay the bill. You never expect your whole life to shift at the wrong table. On a chilly October evening, Luke Harper, a single dad dressed in worn jeans and a faded flannel, stepped into a family-style diner with two squirmy 5-year-olds. His twin daughters, Ava and Maya. With a car seat in one hand and a diaper bag slung over his shoulder, he did not look like the CEO of a tech conglomerate. And that was exactly the point. This wasn't a publicity stunt. This was a test. Luke had signed up for a dating app under a fake name, using an old photo, and no mention of wealth. He wanted to know. Would someone care about him, not his money? So he borrowed an old Chevy, left his Rolex at home, and showed up at Jenny's Country Kitchen, a place that smelled like pie and patience. But as he adjusted booster seats and tried to calm the girls' giggles with napkins folded into butterflies, he checked his phone again. The last message from his date. Sorry, can't do a broke dad. Good luck. Short, cruel, brutal. He sighed, reached for the twins' jackets. Then the diner bell jingled. A woman walked in. She wore a wool cardigan over a floral dress and carried a canvas tote bag filled with books. Blonde curls peeked from under a knit hat. She looked slightly lost until her eyes landed on him. She stepped forward and smiled nervously. "Hi, I'm Rachel," she said, brushing hair behind her ear. "Sorry I'm late. The bus was crawling." Luke opened his mouth about to explain. But then he didn't. Because something about her, the gentleness in her voice, the curiosity in her eyes as she glanced at Ava's crayon doodles, stopped him. She didn't scan the room for someone richer. She didn't look disappointed. She sat down. "I figured this had to be the table," she said, laughing softly. "You said window seat, and the twins are a pretty solid clue." He blinked. Yeah, this is us." Rachel leaned in toward Ava and Maya. "You two look like trouble." Maya grinned. "We are trouble," she announced proudly. Ava held up a napkin with scribbles. "This is a dragon with polka dots." Rachel gasped. "My favorite kind." Luke sat back stunned. She was staying. She hadn't even glanced at the menu yet, but already she had the twins giggling. No judgment, no eye rolls, no excuses. He felt the tension in his shoulders start to ease. For the first time in years, he wasn't wearing his title. He wasn't Mr. Harper from the Forbes list. He was just a tired dad with mismatched socks and 2 ketchup-stained kids. And somehow, that felt right. As the server poured water and the diner filled with the hum of clinking dishes and low conversation, Rachel leaned over to whisper, "Is it weird if I say this feels kind of nice?" Luke nodded slowly. Not weird at all. It was the wrong table, the wrong date, but for reasons he couldn't name yet. It felt exactly where he was meant to be. Some meals are remembered for the food. Others, for the mess, the laughter, and the person who didn't flinch when things got messy. Luke watched in quiet amazement as Rachel folded a napkin into the shape of a rabbit for Ava, who squealed like it was sorcery. Maya was already halfway through drawing a 3-legged unicorn in pink crayon. They were enchanted. And Luke. He was bewildered. He had brought women around the girls before. Not often, just enough to know how it usually went. Awkward. Polite. Forced. But this was effortless. The kids weren't performing. Rachel wasn't pretending. And when the spaghetti arrived, steaming and sauce-laden, the chaos came with it. Ava reached too far for a breadstick and knocked over her orange juice. It spilled across the table like a wave soaking Luke's napkin and Rachel's sleeve. "Oh no," Ava gasped, face frozen. Rachel looked down at her wet arm and laughed. "Well," she said, grinning at the twins, "I guess I've been officially initiated into the club of dinner disasters." She pulled another napkin from the holder and calmly dabbed her sleeve. Maya pointed with delight. "You have sauce on your elbow." "I wear it with pride," Rachel replied, striking a dramatic pose. Luke chuckled. He couldn't help it. Normally, a moment like this would make him want to disappear under the table. But watching Rachel, not flustered, not fake, just genuine, was unexpected and disarming. The girls kept peppering her with questions. "Do you like cats? Do you know how to draw a donut? Have you ever seen a shooting star?" Rachel answered everyone with a story. "I once tripped into a birthday cake at the library, face first, frosting everywhere. Both girls howled with laughter. Luke leaned back slowly, realizing something he hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. She wasn't asking about his job. She wasn't subtly trying to guess what car he drove. She wasn't comparing his life to hers. She was listening, not just to him but to them, his daughters, his entire world. And then came the moment that stopped everything. Halfway through dinner, the waiter placed a small leather folder on the table. The check. Luke instinctively reached toward his back pocket, but then his fingers froze. He'd forgotten. These weren't his usual jeans. No wallet, no backup credit card. This was a borrowed car, a borrowed outfit, a borrowed identity. For a second, panic flared in his chest. Did he really just drag his kids on a fake date and forget the one thing that mattered? The bill. He looked up at Rachel, ready to explain, maybe to apologize. But she was already sliding her card to the server. "It's fine," she said, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. Luke blinked. "You didn't have to do that." "I know," she said softly, "but you look like you needed someone to just be kind." There was no pity in her eyes, just understanding. The kind of understanding that sees the person in front of you, not who they should be or what they have, but how hard they're trying. And in that moment, with sticky hands reaching for crayons, a check paid without a second thought, and a woman covered in spaghetti sauce, smiling like she was exactly where she wanted to be, Luke realized he hadn't just met someone kind. He'd met someone who felt like home. Some people walk into your life and leave a mark. Others walk in, sit down, pay for dinner, and somehow take residence in your thoughts. 4 days had passed since that unexpected dinner. 4 long days since Rachel walked into that diner, and without knowing it, stitched something warm and unfamiliar into Luke Harper's heart. Since she drew cats on napkins and laughed off orange juice stains like it was nothing. Since she saw his daughters, and made them laugh like they hadn't in years. Luke told himself it was just a coincidence, a fluke. But every time he passed that crooked crayon drawing, they'd tape to the fridge or the paper napkin with Rachel plus Ava scribbled in purple marker, or the words, "You looked like you needed kindness," echoing in his head. He knew. She'd gotten in. Not through charm, not through attraction, through presence, through the way she made messy things feel beautiful. And so, on that Saturday morning, he packed the girls into the car. He told himself it was just a casual visit to the library. No big deal, just a fun weekend outing, he muttered as he buckled Maya into her seat. But his heart was pounding harder than it ever had during a boardroom pitch. He wasn't sure she'd be there, wasn't sure she'd even want to see them again. All he had to go on was a passing comment. "I work at the library near Pine Street, the one with the red doors." The red doors weren't hard to find. The building stood like a storybook memory, small, old-fashioned, with ivy creeping up one side. Inside, the air changed. The quiet wrapped around them like a blanket of stillness and stories. Kids were clustered on a rug in the children's corner, listening to a voice, her voice. And then the bear said, Rachel paused theatrically, holding up a picture book. "Who took my hat?" The kids giggled, squealed. Ava gasped. "That's her!" Maya pointed. "It's Miss Rachel." Before Luke could stop them, the girls bolted toward the reading circle, squeezing between toddlers and beanbags. Rachel looked up mid-sentence. Her eyes widened as she spotted them. Then slowly she looked past the twins and saw him. Luke stood just inside the entrance, hands in his jacket pockets, unsure if he should wave or bolt. Rachel closed the book with a soft clap. "Let's take a quick break, friends," she said, smiling at the crowd. 5 minutes. The kids groaned, scattering toward beanbags and puzzles. Rachel stood slowly. "You found me," she said. Luke nodded. "I remembered what you said. The red doors." For a moment, the silence between them wasn't awkward. It was uncertain, heavy, fragile. Ava held up a folded paper. "We made you another drawing." Rachel smiled and took it. "Thank you, sweetheart." But her gaze shifted back to Luke. "You weren't the man I was supposed to meet that night," she said quietly. "No," Luke admitted. "You were meeting someone else." She crossed her arms, but not defensively. "Then, why did you stay?" Luke drew a slow breath. "Because I couldn't walk away. Not when someone finally saw me. Not Luke the CEO. Not the guy with a bank account and a business plan. Just me, a dad. A man trying not to fall apart." Rachel's expression flickered. Her eyes softened. Not fully trusting, not yet, but listening. I didn't lie. He added, I didn't pretend. I just didn't correct you because it felt so good to be treated like a human instead of a headline. She looked away for a moment. Luke stepped closer. I don't know what this is, he said, or if it's anything. But I had to say thank you. For dinner, for laughter, for making my girls feel like they mattered. Rachel looked down at the crayon drawing in her hand. Crooked heart stick figures and a dragon with 3 eyes. What I saw that night, she whispered, was real. Luke nodded. It was... Her lips parted as if to speak, then stopped. I need time, she said finally. Take all the time you need. And just like that, he turned to go. But as he reached the door, he heard Ava shout behind him. Miss Rachel, will you come draw cats again? Rachel laughed softly. Maybe, sweetheart. Maybe. And for Luke, that maybe was the most hopeful word he'd heard in a very, very long time. Some truths weigh heavier not because they're ugly, but because they're honest and overdue. Rachel tucked the kids back into story time. Her voice was steady, her smile gentle, but inside she felt rattled. Luke Harper had found her, and he had said things that made her question the safe little walls she'd spent years building. She needed a breath. 5 minutes. She headed for the back stacks, her favorite corner, the place where classic picture books and forgotten fairy tales waited silently for little hands. She didn't expect Luke to follow, but he did. He paused at the far end of the row, unsure whether to say anything. Then softly, do you mind if I talk to you? For real this time. Rachel leaned against a shelf, crossing her arms. I think you've earned at least that. He nodded, stepped closer. I wasn't trying to trick you, he began. I didn't want to be that guy again. The one women Google before they say hello. I wanted one evening, just one, where I wasn't the tech guy or billionaire single dad. Rachel didn't interrupt. Her silence wasn't cold. It was cautious. Luke continued. When you walked in, I was going to correct you. I really was. But then you sat down, and you looked at my girls like they were treasures, like sticky fingers and wild curls didn't scare you. Rachel's voice broke through. They don't. I know, he said, and that's what terrified me. Because it wasn't just you liking them, it was them loving you, in 10 minutes flat. She exhaled through her nose. You know how many people run when they see twin toddlers at a table? Luke almost laughed. At least one last week. She finally smiled. Just a little. I didn't plan this, he said. And I know you didn't either. But what happened at that table wasn't fake. Rachel softened. So who are you, really? He inhaled deeply. My name is Luke Harper. I run a tech firm out of Charlotte. It's boring, complicated, a lot of press and expectations. But that night I was just a dad with 2 girls and a stain on his shirt. She tilted her head. You didn't seem very corporate over spaghetti. He laughed. Thank God. Rachel looked down at the folded paper in her hand. The girls' new drawing, stick figures holding hands, a rainbow over them, the word love written backwards. I wasn't looking for this, she said, quieter now. I'm not someone who dates CEOs. I live in a 1-bedroom above a bookstore. I don't wear designer anything. I rescue books people leave behind at bus stops. Luke took a slow step forward. And yet he whispered, you made my daughters laugh so hard they forgot how sad they were when they lost their mom. Rachel looked up. Her eyes shimmered. You're a widower. He nodded, jaw tight. 3 years. Caroline passed when the girls were barely old enough to talk. They remember her in flashes, laughter lullabies. But they've never called anyone mama since. Rachel's throat tightened. And yet Luke said, voice low, you walked into our lives, and it was like they'd been waiting for you. She looked away, blinking quickly. I don't know what to do with this, she admitted. It's fast. It's weird. It's not the life I had planned. I know, he said, but neither did I. The air between them was full, not with tension, but with something fragile and tender. Rachel, he said softly, I'm not asking you to decide anything right now. I wanted you to know the truth. You deserve that. She looked at him, really looked, and for the first time she didn't see a man with hidden wealth. She saw a father, a widower, a man trying and terrified to believe in something again. Rachel nodded slowly. Okay, she said, let's take it slow. Luke smiled, not wide but real. I can do slow, he said. I just needed to know I hadn't imagined it. You didn't? And with that, she turned back toward the reading circle, back toward the twins who were now loudly debating whether dragons could ride bicycles. Luke stayed in the aisle a moment longer, heart pounding. He didn't know where this was going, but he finally knew it was going somewhere. It didn't happen in grand gestures, no sudden declarations, no violins playing under moonlight. It happened in the soft, steady rhythm of quiet moments, the kind that sneak into your heart when you're not looking. After that talk in the back of the library, Rachel didn't vanish. She didn't rush in either. Instead, she stayed cautiously. The next week, Luke brought the girls to the library again. They pretended it was for story time, but Ava's delighted squeal when Rachel waved gave everything away. Rachel smiled, pretending to be surprised. "Oh, fancy seeing you three here again." They all played along. That weekend they met at the park. Maya insisted that dragons lived in the pine trees. Rachel agreed solemnly and helped the girls set traps with leaves and string. Luke sat on the bench nearby, just watching. He didn't need to speak, just seeing Rachel with the girls, the way they gravitated to her, the way she listened like their stories mattered more than anything else in the world. It stilled something in him. He had spent 3 years fearing the next chapter. But now, maybe he didn't have to write it alone. The following Sunday, they invited her to dinner. Not at the mansion. Luke knew better. He took them to the cottage instead. It was a small lived-in house tucked along the lake. It used to belong to his mother, and he'd kept it exactly as it was. Flower pots on the porch, chipped wind chimes clinking in the breeze. "This is where I go," Luke said, parking beside the gravel driveway when I need to remember who I am, not who everyone says I should be. Rachel stepped out of the car, her fingers brushing the petals of a daisy pod. "It feels real." Inside, the girls had taped crayon drawings to every wall. "Look," Ava pointed proudly. "This one's you reading a book to a dragon." Rachel laughed, kneeling to study it. "Wow, I've never looked better." Dinner was spaghetti, again, by popular demand. Luke wore a ridiculous apron that said, "Kiss the cook and burn the garlic bread." Rachel helped pour drinks and pass rolls, while the girls chattered non-stop about school books and how one kid in class claimed his dog could skateboard. No one looked at their phones. No one checked the clock. After dinner, Luke brought out an old board game box. Rachel helped tie Maya's shoe, her hand brushing back a lock of hair that had fallen across the little girl's face. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a tiny star-shaped hairpin. "I used to keep these for emergencies," she said gently, pinning it in place. Maya beamed. Luke, watching from the doorway with a dish towel in hand, felt something inside him shift. It wasn't the act. It wasn't even the hairpin. It was the look Maya gave her. A look filled with trust. A kind of silent love that couldn't be taught, only earned. Rachel sat back on her heels. "I've never had kids warm up to me this fast." Luke's voice was quiet. Not usually." She looked up. "After Caroline died, he said it's like they could feel things more. Like they had this radar for who was real and who wasn't. And you." He swallowed. "You didn't just pass their test. It's like they've been waiting for you." Rachel looked away, blinking fast. "I don't know what I'm doing," she whispered. "I just care." Luke set the towel down. That's exactly what they need. Later that night, the girls curled up on the rug with a picture book, heads leaning together. Rachel stretched out nearby, thumbing through the pages. Luke lit the fireplace. Outside, the wind rustled through pine needles. Inside, warmth pooled in the corners of the room. Rachel turned toward Luke. "You're different here." He nodded. "I am here. No investors, no press, just me." She shifted closer. "You don't have to prove anything. Not to them, not to me." He smiled. "That's what scares me most." Rachel whispered, "Then don't run from it." And as the fire crackled and the girls softly snored under a mountain of blankets, Luke knew this wasn't just a beginning. It was home coming back to life, one gentle moment at a time. Some words change everything, not because they're shouted, but because they're whispered and meant. It was one of those evenings that felt like it could stretch forever. Rain tapped the rooftop in a steady rhythm. The cottage smelled like lavender and old books. A blanket draped over the couch, and the twins were curled up with Rachel on the living room rug, nestled into the warmth of a bedtime story. Luke watched from the armchair, coffee in hand, too still to move. Rachel held an oversized picture book in her lap. Her voice was soft, rising and falling with each character. Ava and Maya clung to her arms, giggling at the silly voices she gave the talking bear. And the bear looked all over the forest, until he finally found what he'd been missing. Not a hat, but a home. She closed the book slowly. Ava let out a satisfied sigh. But Maya, always the quieter one, reached up her small fingers brushing Rachel's sleeve. "Miss Rachel?" Rachel looked down. "Yes, honey?" Maya blinked slowly, her voice no more than a breath. Can I call you Mama Rachel?" The room stopped. The only sound was the gentle crackle of firewood. Luke sat upright, his mug forgotten. Ava lifted her head, watching silently. Rachel's eyes filled instantly. She didn't speak for a long moment. Then, she dropped to her knees, face level with Maya's, and cupped the little girl's cheek with trembling hands. "If that's what you want, then yes. Of course you can." Maya nodded, crawling into her lap without hesitation. Ava was quick to follow, wrapping her arms around both of them. Luke stood slowly, like something sacred was unfolding, and he didn't want to disturb it. He stepped toward them, crouching beside the trio, and gently placed a hand on Rachel's back. "You didn't try," he whispered, emotion thick in his voice. "You didn't force anything. You just were. And they chose you." Rachel pressed a kiss to the crown of each girl's head. Her tears fell freely now, not from sadness, but something deeper, something like healing. After the girls were tucked into their beds, fingers still wrapped around Rachel's, she lingered a while longer, then carefully slipped her hands free, brushing back curls and whispering soft goodnights. She stepped out into the hallway, wiping her eyes with her sleeve. Luke was waiting. He didn't ask if she was okay. He didn't need to. They stepped out onto the porch, a shared blanket wrapped around their shoulders. The wind chime, Luke's mother's, whispered in the breeze. "I never wanted to replace anyone," Rachel said, her voice barely audible over the rain. "You didn't," Luke replied. "You became someone entirely your own." She leaned against his shoulder. "I didn't think I had enough to give," she said. "You gave them safety," he said, voice low. "You gave me hope." They sat like that for a while, the porch swing swaying gently, the past softening behind them, the future quietly unfolding ahead. Inside, two little girls slept soundly, knowing that love had a new name now. Mama Rachel, and in that single moment, the home that had once echoed with loss was filled once again with belonging. Some love stories unfold in whispers, until the world finds out and turns the volume all the way up. The photo wasn't planned. It was a grainy snapshot taken from behind a row of trees. Rachel was walking hand in hand with Ava and Maya, skipping down the sidewalk outside the Pine Street Library. They were laughing, their faces full of joy. Rachel's smile, soft and unguarded, was the kind only caught when someone thinks no one is watching. But someone had been, and the moment that belonged to them was suddenly everywhere. By noon, her name was trending. By evening, the questions came. Mystery woman spotted with Luke Harper's twins. New romance. Secret wedding. Are the girls calling her mom? Single dad's quiet life. Not so quiet anymore. Reporters swarmed outside Rachel's small apartment building the next day. Cameras pressed against windows. Microphones shoved toward her face as she stepped out to go to work. Neighbors whispered. Someone online dug up an old blog post she'd written about childhood literacy. It was suddenly dissected like a confession. Rachel stood in the eye of the storm, dazed. She hadn't signed up for this. Inside the library, she was called into the director's office. Mr. Hensley, kind, balding, always smelling faintly of mint gum, wouldn't meet her eyes. "There's been pressure," he said quietly. From who, she asked, even though she already knew. "One of our top donors is threatening to pull funding. They say the media frenzy is a distraction, a liability." Rachel's heart dropped. "I didn't do anything wrong." "I know," he said gently, "but they don't care about that. Just appearances." She left with a cardboard box filled with books, bookmarks, and a tiny potted cactus the twins had gifted her during a story hour. As she stepped into the hallway, her coworkers, people who once smiled and shared coffee, turned silent. Whispers followed her like shadows. By the time she got home, the silence had become unbearable. Rachel dropped the box beside the door, sat on her couch, and stared at her dark phone. Dozens of texts, numbers she didn't recognize, news alerts, social media tags, and only one name that stopped her in her tracks: Luke Harper. "Rachel, please talk to me. I had no idea it would happen like this. She read the message twice, then again, but she didn't respond. The next morning, the noise outside her apartment was louder. More reporters. A neighbor shouted down the hallway, "Is it true? Are you marrying him?" Rachel didn't answer. She didn't cry either. She just froze. Then she heard it. The hush of a crowd shifting, a ripple through the voices, and one sharp sound, the slam of a car door. From behind the curtain, she peeked through her window. There he was, Luke, standing at the base of her building steps. No security, no entourage. His coat unbuttoned, his hair tousled by the wind. But his eyes, those unmistakable eyes, fixed only on her door. He didn't flinch at the cameras. He looked up and spoke loud enough for her to hear, but not shout. "Rachel," he said, his voice steady. "I can't stop the noise. I can't change the world. But I can stand between you and it." He swallowed hard. "I'll take the headlines. I'll take the cameras. Just say the word, and I'll stay right here." Inside, Rachel's heart pounded like thunder. Her hand hovered over the lock. But she didn't turn it. Instead, she pressed her forehead against the door and whispered, "You have to protect the girls. Don't let them get caught in this." "They already are," Luke replied from the other side. "They ask about you every night. They miss you. I miss you." Tears welled in her eyes. Her voice cracked. "I didn't ask for this. I know," he said gently. "But neither did we. And yet somehow this you became the most real thing I've had in years." Silence. Long, heavy. "I'm sorry," she whispered, "but I need you to go." Luke didn't argue. Didn't beg. He just stood still for one more breath, then turned and walked back through the crowd. One slow, deliberate step at a time. When the door finally clicked shut behind her, Rachel sank to the floor beside the forgotten box. The world had found their story, but they had taken it apart, and Rachel, left alone in the quiet, wondered if something this fragile could ever be put back together again. Love doesn't always come back with grand speeches. Sometimes it returns as crayon hearts, taped gently to a door. Rachel hadn't moved the drawing, the one Ava had handed her at the library, a purple cat with uneven ears surrounded by stars and the word "love" in big block letters. It was still taped to her door, fluttering slightly whenever someone walked past. 3 days had passed since Luke stood outside offering to take the storm for her. 3 days since she turned him away. The world had moved on. A new celebrity scandal had stolen the headlines, and the reporters outside her building had mostly disappeared. But the silence that remained, and every time Rachel stepped out, her fingers brushed that drawing, as if asking it for forgiveness. She told herself it was better this way. Clean break, quiet life, no attachments. But every night she dreamed of small hands grabbing hers, of giggles echoing off crayon-covered walls, of Maya whispering Mama Rachel under a blanket fort. She missed them. God, she missed them. On the third morning, as she sipped lukewarm tea and tried to reorganize her bookshelf for the fourth time, a soft knock echoed through the apartment. She froze. Another knock, then silence. She stood heart racing and moved to the door, slowly, cautiously, as if afraid the moment would vanish if she rushed. When she looked through the peephole, she gasped. It was them. Luke stood there, not in a suit, not in design or anything, just jeans, a windbreaker, and weariness in his eyes. In his arms were Ava and Maya. They weren't carrying flowers or balloons. They held something better. A new drawing. Rachel cracked the door slightly, just enough to hear Luke whisper, "We didn't come for headlines. We came with our hearts." The girls stepped forward. Ava reached up and gently taped their newest creation underneath the old one, a picture of 3 stick figures, 1 tall, 2 small, and all of them holding hands. Over their heads were floating red hearts. The words written in bold crayon strokes read, "We bring our hearts." Luke knelt beside them, setting the girls down carefully. They stretched out their arms, not sure if they'd be welcomed, but hoping. Inside, Rachel's knees buckled. She pressed a hand to her chest, her breath catching. She opened the door fully, and there they were. 2 tiny girls with outstretched arms, hopeful eyes, and no cameras in sight. Rachel dropped to her knees. Ava rushed in first, burying her face in Rachel's neck. Maya followed, clinging tighter than ever. "I missed you," Rachel choked out, so much. Tears streamed freely now. But this time, they weren't about fear, or shame, or loss. They were about returning. Luke stayed a step back watching. Rachel looked up, eyes rimmed with emotion. "Why did you really come?" Luke's voice trembled. "Because I can live without the money, the name, the silence, but not without this, not without you." She shook her head slowly. "I thought I had to protect you, all of you, from the mess." "You were trying," Luke said, kneeling beside her, "but leaving didn't protect us. It just hurt." Rachel reached out and took his hand, the girl still wrapped around her legs. She didn't need to say a word. Instead, she stepped aside and opened the door wide. The moment was quiet. No paparazzi, no headlines, just the sound of crayon paper fluttering in the breeze, and the feeling of four hearts walking into the same home. Not perfectly, but together. Some love stories don't just heal the people inside them. They ripple outward, changing the lives of everyone they touch. After Rachel opened the door, life didn't go back to what it was. It became something quieter, stronger, more intentional. There were no interviews, no public statements. Luke didn't try to spin the reunion into some PR campaign. In fact, he ignored every reporter who came calling. Instead, they focused inward, on the real things. Walks to the farmer's market, bedtime stories read with silly voices, pancake breakfasts with too much syrup and lopsided whipped cream. But it wasn't long before Rachel, sitting at the kitchen table with the twins one rainy afternoon, said something that caught Luke's attention. "I wish we could do more," she murmured, watching Ava and Maya draw smiley faces in the margins of library books. "For kids who don't have this, have what Luke asked, sipping his coffee. This," she said, gesturing gently. "Books, safety, someone to read to them." Luke leaned forward. "If you could do anything, anything at all, what would it be?" Rachel looked up surprised. "You mean, for real?" He nodded. "Completely real." She smiled. "I'd start a mobile reading program for kids in shelters, for the ones who stay late at the library because they don't want to go home. I'd bring story time to them." Luke didn't hesitate. "Then let's build it." And just like that, Story Nest was born. It started with an old delivery van Luke had sitting in storage. He had it painted sky blue with soft clouds and smiling books dancing across the sides. The name, Story Nest, was written in crayon-style letters designed by Ava and Maya themselves. Rachel curated the first collection of books, not just fairy tales, but stories that reflected the kids who'd read them. Books about courage, about kindness, about families that looked different but felt whole. She recruited volunteers, retired teachers, parents, high schoolers looking for meaning beyond a screen. Luke funded it quietly. He refused to slap his name on the project. Instead, his company released simple press blurbs, highlighting Rachel's leadership, the program's mission. The hundreds of children who now had a reading hour every week. They visited churches, battered women's shelters, after-school programs, even parking lots outside apartment complexes. The van would pull up, the doors would open, and kids would come running, their eyes lighting up at the sight of the shelves and beanbags inside. Rachel read every story like it mattered, because to her, they did. The twins often came along. Sometimes they helped hand out snacks. Other times they curled beside Rachel, listening to her read the same books they'd heard 100 times before, just because they loved the sound of her voice. The community took notice, and slowly the narrative around Rachel shifted. She wasn't the mystery woman anymore. She was Miss Rachel, the one with the reading van, the one who remembered your name, the one who brought books and hugs and warm smiles to kids who desperately needed all three. Back at home, their rhythm had become beautifully mundane. Rachel stayed for dinner more often. Then overnight, when the twins asked if she could help brush their hair before bed, she taught them how to draw eyebrows that made cartoon characters look surprised, how to write their own mini picture books. Luke watched all of it unfold like a man witnessing spring after a long winter. And every now and then, when no one was looking, he would slip one of their crayon drawings into his desk drawer, not because they were masterpieces, but because they were theirs. Their family was no longer forming. It had formed in the space between bedtime stories and mobile libraries. They had built something bigger than themselves, something that mattered. It started with spaghetti. It ended with a ring made of bead string, and the kind of love that doesn't need diamonds to shine. A full year had passed since Rachel walked into the wrong date and sat at the wrong table, only to find something more right than she'd ever dreamed. Since then, life had been simple, joyful, not flashy or loud, just steady. She still lived in her cozy apartment above the Pine Street bookstore, even though Luke had offered to move her into his estate more than once. She always smiled and said, "I need roots, not marble floors." He understood. So, they spent most of their time at the cottage, the place with chipped mugs, uneven floorboards, and crayon art still proudly taped to the fridge. On this particular afternoon, Rachel was helping set up for a backyard picnic. Nothing fancy, just sandwiches, lemonade, and two little girls running barefoot through the grass with daisy chains in their hair. Luke had rebuilt the table they had used the first night they met. Same size, same mismatched chairs, even the center wobble. Rachel noticed and laughed. "You rebuilt the wrong table." "Some mistakes," Luke said, grinning, "are worth keeping." After sandwiches and sunshine, Ava and Maya disappeared into the cottage, giggling like they were up to something. When they returned, they carried a tiny box wrapped in napkins and crayon drawings. "For you," Maya said, proudly handing it to Rachel. "En de folies stores." Rachel opened it slowly. Inside was a ring. It wasn't gold or silver. It was made from soft white string, woven with uneven, colorful beads. Some shaped like stars, one like a book, and two tiny purple hearts. "We made it," Ava beamed. "It's your special ring." Luke knelt beside her. Not with fanfare, not with a speech rehearsed for cameras. Just him, real, quiet, open. I used to believe, he began, voice shaking, that I'd only ever be loved for what I had. My name, my company, the house, the money. Rachel's eyes glistened. But then came a wrong table. He continued, two little girls, and a woman who saw me. Not the net worth, not the suit, but the man underneath it. He reached for her hand. "I'm not asking for headlines or a grand ceremony. Just this: be you, with us. Be the heart of this home." He paused. "Rachel Lane, will you marry me?" Rachel looked at the ring, then at the girls, wide-eyed, hopeful, their hands clenched together. She laughed through her tears. "You guys are so ahead of schedule," she whispered. Then she slipped the ring onto her finger, holding it high. "I think we've been a family for a while now," she said gently. "You're just catching up." The girls squealed and wrapped their arms around both of them. They fell into a pile of hugs, giggles, and spring sunlight. No cameras, no flash bulbs, no one shouting questions. Just the sound of wind in the trees, and two little girls who had unknowingly written the ending to the most unexpected love story. Love, real love, doesn't arrive on schedule. It doesn't check your resume. It doesn't care if you're powerful or if your car smells like crayons and juice boxes. Sometimes it shows up when you least expect it, disguised as a mistake, a mix-up, a wrong table. That turns out to be exactly where you belong. For Luke, it wasn't about finding someone new. It was about healing, letting go of the guilt that loving again meant forgetting what came before. For Rachel, it wasn't about being swept off her feet. It was about being seen, being enough, exactly as she was, with book-stained fingers and late-night doubts. And for Ava and Maya, it was about finding the missing piece, not a replacement for the mother they'd lost, but someone who made bedtime stories better, pancakes warmer, and hugs even safer. The life they built didn't make headlines. It didn't need to. There were no front-page photos of grocery store runs or quiet Sunday mornings. But in those small, ordinary moments, they created something extraordinary, a family. So if you're sitting at the wrong table, if your life feels a little off track, a little too quiet, or not quite what you pictured, remember this. Sometimes the wrong door opens to the right story, and all it takes is one moment of kindness, one heart brave enough to stay, and a little crayon drawing that says, "We bring our hearts. Thank you for being part of this journey." If this story touched you, if it reminded you that love doesn't need to be perfect, just true, then stay with us. There are more stories to tell, more hearts to heal. Until next time, stay kind, and never underestimate the power of showing up at the wrong table and choosing to stay.